Hey, GS112. Today we are going to, well, I guess learn how to speak Latin and also talk about a whole bunch of logical fallacies. This is going to be a super useful sheet to have in front of you. This should be available as a resource guide. A lot of these have Latin names. I'll try to go through and explain them in a boring way, and then I'll give you an example that'll hopefully make it a little bit easier to understand in kind of your day-to-day life. Without further ado, let's get it going.
Hi, I'm Joanna.
And I'm Steve.
And this is a piece of PVC pipe.
And this is a plastic cup that has a hole drilled into the bottom of it. So when I fill it with water, it leaks out of the bottom.
If I charge the pipe and then bring it close to the stream of water, the water is attracted to it. That's because water molecules are polar molecules.
Water molecules look a little bit like Mickey Mouse. The two hydrogen atoms are bunched up on one side of the oxygen atom. And while the molecule itself is neutral overall, it has a positive end and a negative end because of the way it's shaped. Molecules, like water, that have an asymmetrical distribution of charge are called polar molecules.
Let's say the pipe has a negative electrical charge. If I bring it close to the stream of water, the water molecule flips so that the positive end is pointed towards the negatively charged pipe. Opposite charges attract, so the water is drawn towards the pipe.
This is an experiment you can do for yourself at home fairly easily. All you need to do is turn on the faucet so a little bit of water comes out, and then you place a charged object near the water. Any object that'll hold a charge will do, like a comb.
Or a balloon that you've rubbed on your head.
Or a plastic pen.
Thanks for watching. I hope you'll join us again soon for another experiment.
Before I launch directly into the discussion of faulty logic, I wanted to mention one thing about the discrepant event explained that you just saw. One thing to add to kind of give it a little bit more of a magical feel when you're deflecting that water stream, by the way, you can do that in a faucet too if you just open it up a little bit, is to take your kid or housemate or whoever you want to make yourself seem like a god to, you discharge whatever electrons are built up on that PVC pipe or pen with your hand, so that as you hand it to them and you say like, hey, give this a try, you've pretty much ruined it for them, and so they'll hold it up and it won't do anything. And then of course I usually secretly put some sort of like felt in my pocket and I rub the PVC, and like every time I kind of like hide it to the side, and you can kind of really get a good response with that. Anyway, let's stop talking about interesting things and talk about class stuff. How boring. Well, what we're going to talk about today is all about these logical fallacies, or ways that logic can lead us wrong. The reason this matters to us in science is obviously you're looking for a whole bunch of consensus among experts in a given field. And what can happen is sometimes even the experts can kind of get fooled by kind of falling into the trap of using a couple of these logical fallacies. It really is interesting to look at the human brain. I don't know if anybody has ever read anything from Malcolm Gladwell or Daniel Kahneman, but both of these individuals have really great books that if you're interested in some summer reading, I could point you in the direction of, that have everything to do with either ways that our brains kind of lead us wrong, or kind of like the processes that are going on that we are not even aware of in the human brain. A lot of it has to do with kind of like, well, once again, casinos and advertising and things like that, where people make decisions and pretty consistent decisions in a certain direction. You're like, well, what the heck is going on? They're pretty interesting. Anyway, get back to the point, Sean. Okay, so what the heck is a logical fallacy? Just to define it, really, it's just anytime you see some sort of faulty logic. Each one of these logical fallacies, as I said, will kind of start with my silly example, and believe me, they're going to get more and more silly as we go on here. But we'll take a look. So the first logical fallacy we're going to talk about is called ad hominem, and you hear this quite a bit. One of the things that you might have heard someday is that you'll hear something from somebody and say, "No way, that guy's an idiot," right? Or some other insert Mad Lib insult here. And this is actually considered a logical fallacy. I mean, sometimes it can even the dumbest person can come up with something that is correct. The keynote here is that instead of looking at the evidence itself, you just automatically dismiss it out of hand because the person that was proposing something is being attacked, right? And typically this is something that's kind of considered unfairly attacked. Another logical fallacy is called argument from authority. I don't know how to say that in Latin. But typically this is something that PhDs will use, and they'll say something like, it'll go something like, "Hey, that gal is super smart. Oh my gosh, they've got a PhD. They've studied some particular field for a long, long time. They must be right." Well, it turns out that there's a reason that we only accept certain bits of data from the experts in the field. Is just because you're an expert in one field doesn't automatically make you an expert in some other field. So a lot of times, just because somebody that is like making the claim is got a position, some sort of letters next to their name, or this happens all the time on the internet, has 1 billion followers. Oh my gosh, they must be right. And so it kind of gets you to take your guard down. So sometimes particularly on the internet, you'll see this person is called Dr. yada yada, and you'll look at what their doctorate's in, and they're talking about like nutritional science, but their doctorate's in I don't know, like English literature or something like that. It's a really typical thing. Confusing association with confusing correlation with causation is a really, really fun one. The example for this that I came up with is pretty awesome. So here with the purple, you can see the people that drowned after falling out of a fishing boat. And then you can also see under that the marriage rate in Kentucky, right? And hey, man, this is like following the same trend. So this must mean that because people are falling out of fishing boats, then marriages in Kentucky are declining or something like that. Like this is obviously silly. I really want to have some fun sometime. There's some really hilarious graphs that show that correlation isn't necessarily causation that you can find if you go to that hyperlink there. Just to define it explicitly, I think this one is fairly obvious, but just the fact that two variables change together is actually a mistake to just automatically assume one is the cause of the other. Later in the term, we'll be talking about some statistical measures that scientists use to try to at least support causation. And so, yeah, you got that going on for you. You get to talk about some statistics later in the class, so that's nice. But anyway, human mind, really, there's a reason for this. As I mentioned, a lot of these fallacies come from some sort of advantage that was provided us over time. It really seems like the mind wants to kind of find a reason for things. This is actually one of the sources for things like superstition. So, back when I was playing football in college, one of the things that I would commonly do is like I would rub the top of my helmet before I would put it on. I started it in high school, and I felt like every time I did that I'd end up with a better game. So like, I'm pretty sure that didn't have anything to do with it. It might have making me feel better, but I know for a fact that I started to question that when I started getting run over by Justin Levis at every practice. But anyway, another logical fallacy: false dichotomy. If it isn't this answer, it must be the other thing. Well, it turns out that it's usually not as simple as just a simple if-then statement. Really, this happens all the time. People that are science deniers, they say, well, obviously, because the scientists haven't answered it this way, it must automatically be the other thing. But honestly, in a complicated world, maybe it's just something that we haven't even thought of. Turns out that reality is super complicated. This fallacy kind of overstates things. Ad hoc reasoning is something that I know in times of coronavirus I do with my wife all the time. It's just kind of like thinking on your feet and trying to come up with any, throwing things at the wall, just trying to get something to stick. So a great example of this is, well, I must be the best teacher. That class of failing students just hated me, right? It's just coming up with some explanation that probably has nothing to do with reality. Typically, this is done in the heat of the moment, when some little bit of evidence doesn't support some sort of conclusion. The thing you have to be really careful about with this ad hoc reasoning is that sometimes it can actually prove to be correct. It's just obvious in science that we have to make sure that, that is initially maybe a hypothesis that has to have all kinds of peer-reviewed research in order to truly be, accepted as the explanation. One logical fallacy that you see quite often in day-to-day life also is this idea of moving the goalpost. For the example here, I will concede that I'm the worst teacher at UCC only if you show me that I didn't spend every waking moment grading and meeting with students. And then a student responds, here are your plane tickets for the week you spent watching playoff hockey in Pittsburgh. And the teacher says, well, I still can't be the worst teacher because I never gave a student a swirly. And I just like to talk about swirlies. There's something that is free to you if you'd like to use that somewhere. Kind of obvious here, this idea that, you might have been proven wrong about something. And so the second that you feel like you've been proven wrong, you just kind of ignore that. And then you immediately come up with some new criteria. Often this thing is used by critics of science and also denialists. Yay, some more Latin. Ad ignorantium. I'm not even sure I'm saying that right. A great example of this is that, hey, man, you don't know what I was doing last Thursday. I could have been building homes with Habitat for Humanity. A huge body of evidence out there, maybe that suggests I'm the most selfish person in Roseburg. You gotta just throw it out and not even consider it. The classic thing, oh, nah, I'm awesome. Geez Louise. Just because one small part of a theory isn't yet explained doesn't necessarily mean you should throw out the whole thing. That's the whole point. Not yet explained doesn't equal it will never be explained. Related to this kind of logical fallacy is kind of that idea that I suggested in week 1 that it's actually really tough to prove a negative, right? Great example of this, or maybe not great, but just something that popped into my mind because my dad is a big believer in Bigfoot and goes out on these expeditions. It's really tough to prove that he doesn't exist, right? Like there is nothing really that you could do to, support that hypothesis. Like all you can do is continue to show, data that would suggest that he doesn't exist. But, can you really prove it ever? Right? It can be, 0.0000001%, right? And still oftentimes you can kind of, hold on to an idea. This is core to understanding things about science, is that there's not any proof in science, right? That is, I think I mentioned it in a couple of posts in the week 1 discussions, that, if you ever hear a scientist that says XYZ is proven, I would really start to wonder if they're truly a scientist. What a scientist should really say is that this is strongly supported by evidence. Enough on my soapbox here. The straw man logical fallacy. I love this one. Oregon State Beaver fans are mentally incompetent and drink toilet water recreationally. Oregon Duck fans don't drink toilet water and are therefore totally mentally competent and far superior. Despite the fact that this is obviously true, the fact is it is really a logical fallacy. turns out that this kind of fallacy misrepresents an opposing position that makes it really easy to refute. So you beat the opposing position like a scarecrow or straw man. I used to hear this argument all the time, like, "Oh, you're using the straw man argument." I had at the time no idea where that idea of a straw man came from. So that's why they call it the straw man. That you're just kind of like setting this thing up so that you can beat the crap out of it. Usually the opposing position isn't even close to the representation portrayed, although I have seen Oregon State fans drink toilet water. Hopefully the role of inconsistency will be apparent in this next example. So my daughter's perfect. She paints unicorn pictures all the time. Son, total loser, man. Can't even write a novel. Yeah, don't ignore the fact that he's only 5. So the hallmark of this is that you use different criteria to criticize one point of view and not the other. Not that you've ever seen this in your own life. This is called a double standard. I think this one is going to be a relatively short one. I guess the only thing that we didn't talk about is ego in terms of the human fallibility component. I think that one's probably pretty easy. If you want to take a glance at some really serious ego, there's all kinds of stories from all throughout science. Probably the best one is the person that came up with plate tectonics, Alfred Wegener, and the fact that it turns out to be pretty right about the ideas of plate tectonics that he had like very, very early in like the 1900s. And it took about 100 years for people to accept it and to kind of look through the reasons that, scientific community refused to kind of recognize plate tectonics was this like perfect example of like double standard. And that's pretty much all I have for you. I'm going to show you, technically it's not going to be a discrepant event. It's just a demo that I love to do every year. And those are the colored flames that you're about to see. And I will explain a little bit about those on Friday. Keep in mind, Friday's class is going to be not necessarily new lecture information. What it's going to be is just kind of me highlighting some of the interesting things about the book that you're reading. I think you were supposed to read chapter 1 and 2 and do a little reading guide. And that's, of course, due Friday. Don't forget about your online quiz that happens every Friday. What other things are happening? Celebrations on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And I have a really fun lab for you tomorrow as well, which hopefully you'll be able to find something to help somebody to help you out with. But I think that's about all. So I will see you for lab tomorrow.
Chemical, and I list them in the description below so you can know what chemicals I used. We're going to add some methanol, which let's light it up and see what it looks like.